Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and welcome to another episode of ISTJ Observations. Or is it ENFP Observations? Recently, I've been mistyped as an ENFP, and I just thought that that was so funny that I'm going to try to make a running joke out of it for a while until I get a more concrete answer on which function stack is actually applicable. However, assuming that the joke is actually a reality and I've been mistyping myself as my opposite letter type, at least we share the same functions in common, so at least I won't get that part wrong. ISTJs have introverted sensing, extroverted thinking, introverted feeling, and finally extroverted intuition. ENFPs are just reverse in that order. So naturally, there's going to be some overlap between how the types process and externalize information. It's just the priorities are going to be in a different order. ENFPs might be more afraid of what the ISTJs naturally excel at, and vice versa. I'm just going to present what I think are the dual natures of some of the functions, and you guys can make up your mind what type you think I am. Do you think I'm an ISTJ that just happens to be very tangential and good in front of a camera, or do you think I'm an ENFP because I'm constantly generating new ideas and I didn't write a script for this? And so that further cements my status as a perceiving type. Technically, according to socionics, both types are perceiving types, but let's stick to Myers-Briggs for your sake. So, I was inspired to make this video after rewatching a couple of Isabel's videos. It's no secret that she and I are really good friends by now, so I'm not even going to try to hide it. And one of the episodes that I was rewatching was her episode all about INFJ duality, and how, according to her and probably a lot of others in the Myers-Briggs community, INFJs have traits that are both strengths and weaknesses. So I thought it would be fun to look at the cognitive functions of the ISTJ and the ENFP because they're, oh, there's my phone, because they're Okay, so before I got sidetracked by my phone having a text alert, let's recap what I just said a minute ago. I was talking about how the ISTJs and the ENFPs share the same top 4 cognitive functions, despite being the opposite letters, whereas the INFJ has a totally different set of cognitive functions. So therefore, their duality is going to look way different than an ISTJ's and an ENFP's. Now, both types are pretty radically different in terms of their descriptions and what they like. ISTJs are more likely to be in line with personal traditions that they find comforting. Every J-type likes routine to a certain degree, but ISTJs seem to thrive on really keeping the past alive and preserving it. Kind of like a refrigerator or a dry-sealed bag, I suppose. But ENFPs, conversely, are all about generating new ideas and new possibilities and wild tangents. And again, neither of the types is incapable of doing either of those because, again, they both have the same cognitive functions. So an ISTJ theoretically could use extroverted intuition to get tangential and wild, and an ENFP could reminisce about the past and draw from past experiences. It's the order that makes the difference. If we're going with introverted sensing as a base, the ISTJ suffers from constantly getting too caught up in the past. Now, the reason why this is a good thing is because ISTJs can often be great sources of information. They love to memorize facts and little details, especially if it relates to them personally, which is where the introverted feeling comes in. That, what does this mean to me? What is this value of mine? So if an ISTJ really likes, I mean, if you take me, I really like video games. So if you ever want to know about like the history of Nintendo consoles and the order in which games in a franchise were released, I can relay that information to you effortlessly. Conversely, I have some friends of mine who are ENFP who would struggle to do that. They would have to think long and hard, probably pause and trip over their own words and just like, I can't remember all that stuff. Paul, you're the megamind here, not me. But that's not to say ENFPs don't have their moments of brilliance. Their extroverted thinking is here compared to here for an ISTJ. So they're not too far apart. And I have seen moments where the ENFPs can appear very intelligent. But getting back to introverted sensing for a moment, the ISTJ can be very intelligent in terms of memorizing facts and then applying those facts, which is what the extroverted thinking does. But where it can become a weakness is if the ISTJ is too unwilling to change. With extroverted intuition being that low down, they might not like disrupting their routines. They might not like innovation and new things coming out and newfangled ways of doing things. I'd like to think the stereotypical example of an unhealthy ISTJ with not enough developed intuition is one of those cranky old men in those old movies that says, "Back in my day we had radio, why do we need a TV? We don't need all that newfangled technology." And I can definitely admit I fell into that category quite a lot as a kid. I had a Nintendo 64 as my first video game system, and when the GameCube first came out, I was freaking out. I was like, why do we need a new system? The Nintendo 64 is just fine. Just keep developing games for that forever. Of course, eventually I saw the error of my ways when I started realizing that games like Paper Mario 2, Animal Crossing, Wind Waker, and Path of Radiance were masterpieces. And I think I was a little bit more accepting once the Wii came out, because I was excited about how immersive motion sensing could be. So I guess you could say over the years I've opened up more to the possibility of change, but back when I was a kid I really hated it, and to a certain extent I still do. I use the joke all the time about my flip phone. Granted, this is a 2019 model, so it's newer, but it's definitely trying to emulate the older style of flip phones as opposed to the touch phones that most people nowadays have. If there's ever a point where my provider, Verizon, just decides to stop supporting flip phones, that'll put me at a disadvantage. And other ISTJs who are much unhealthier than me might run into instances where their lack of willingness to innovate is going to end up hurting them. Maybe there will come a day when cars will get redesigned and the ISTJ will be unable to operate on the road because that other car breaks down and the ISTJ will need to buy a new car, and he or she will be like, I have no idea how to work this new technology. Whereas the ENFP is like, way ahead of you. Not only have I been envisioning this, but being a perceiving type, I'm just going to go with the flow and learn as I go. But then that brings us to a flaw with the ENFPs. They lead with what's called extroverted intuition, which, as I said before, is all about generating new ideas and possibilities. And a lot of times people with extroverted intuition in their function stack can catch the introverted intuitives off guard with how wild their humor and their tangents can be. So this gives the ENFPs an incredible amount of flexibility. A lot of times things like deadlines, routines, and schedules are things that the ENFP hates with a passion. ENFPs don't like being bogged down. I've often heard it said that an ENFP's, and to an extent an ENTP's, worst fear is a cage. They don't like people to tell them what their limits are. So in a sense, ENFPs can be really fun to hang out with because they're very spontaneous people. They can easily adapt to a new situation, and they can easily find a way to take pretty much anything and turn it into something fun. They don't see the need to constantly limit themselves based on the patterns of the past. To give a little bit of devil's advocate about how I could possibly be an ENFP, sometimes I'm talking to someone who uses introverted intuition, and I might just want to make a joke. Like, I might think about the literal applications of a more figurative way of speaking, and then the introverted intuitive looks like they're punch drunk, because introverted intuitives often have this forward thinking type of mind where they try to get to a conclusion, whereas ENFPs like to jump from one conclusion to the other. They don't necessarily have an end goal in mind. So it does lead to them making it very easy for people to laugh. However, they can also get to the point where they're not very good at remembering things. Introverted sensing is supposed to be really good at being like a database or a filing cabinet for various pieces of information. But if the ENFP hasn't developed the inferior sensing, they can get so forgetful that they might neglect their friends, or they might lock their keys in their car, and it can generally put them in a really bad position where their forgetfulness and spontaneity hasn't planned ahead for unforeseen consequences. Now, granted, ISTJs don't exactly plan ahead, but I think for them, they would know how to avoid unpleasant situations that happened to them before. An ENFP might consistently forget things, or consistently trip over their feet, or consistently lose their phone, whereas an ISTJ might lose his or her phone the first time and then say, okay, now that this has happened, let me take steps to avoid this uncomfortable past. ENFPs would usually need a little bit more development of their extroverted thinking to do that, because their introverted feeling is going to be their go-to judging function, which means if I am feeling something in the moment, I'm going to act on that impulse. But unlike the INFPs, usually that introspective, what do I feel about this, comes after they've done their playful experimenting. Now, as far as the judging functions go, this is where ISTJs and ENFPs are a lot more similar than people give them credit for, because again, ISTJs have extroverted thinking here, ENFPs here, and the inverse for introverted feeling. So extroverted thinking is a very pragmatic, concrete function. It likes to think about the tried and true traditions of the past. So you can see where if introverted sensing is right next to it, it can be very insistent on keeping things the same. But you can have extroverted thinking and also have introverted intuition. So extroverted thinking by itself is this very, I guess I would describe it as this ordered knowledge of how things are supposed to work without necessarily filtering out a possibility or a subjective understanding of things. If it has worked and has been proven, it cannot be undone. That's generally the way that high up extroverted thinkers are. They're not typically known for being very flexible. ENFPs, because their extroverted thinking is down here, they often are a little bit too flexible. And so they need to teach themselves how to slow down and say, okay, this is a proven method, and if I try to keep experimenting, that might end up ruining the project or causing something to go wrong. So the higher up extroverted thinkers are the ones that say, okay, let us take into account every bad possible thing that can happen. And the ENFPs can just say, okay, I'll go by whatever it is that you say. And thankfully, most ENFPs in my life listen to me when I say that. So I think with extroverted thinking, because it's extroverted, it often relies on traditions and objective reality that is spoken by other people. So a lot of times they have a tremendous amount of respect for authority figures. When it's in the dominant, they often are the authority figures. And so rules, regulations, things that are meant to be like the standard for operating are things that extroverted thinkers get caught up on a lot. And if they get a little bit too rigid, they might not be able to know where the fine print or the exceptions to the rules are. I know of an INTJ friend of mine who always drives the speed limit on the road because it says you have to go a certain amount of miles, so that's what I'm going to go. The problem is that there's another rule in driver's ed that talks about going with the flow of traffic. But because he's so fixated on following the sign, he's not fixated on that other rule. So that J nature of being determined to do something objective, it's not looking at the exceptions. It's not looking at, well, maybe if I'm going too slow, then I'm going to possibly cause a traffic accident. There's just too much of that reliance on traditional tested logical methods. That's where I think the introverted thinkers might have slightly more of an advantage, because theirs is called bottom-up thinking, where they have their own view of how they see reality. They don't always know how to explain it very well, although a couple of introverted thinkers I know have gotten better at it once I tell them that they need to explain how they see reality. But I think for them, they can more so have come up with a logical train of thought and logically deduce what the best course of action would be, as opposed to automatically defaulting to an external source like I would do. I often get criticized for thinking about the rules too much that I forget about other people's feelings in the process. I remember one time I was talking to this girl that she was having questions about the church's teaching on a certain practice. And I, rather than trying to be supportive and understanding how she felt, just said, well, are you aware that this is what the church teaches? And these are the rules and regulations, so make sure you follow them. She was like, now, Paul, you're not being very sensitive to perhaps the emotions that I was going through at the time. Don't you think that maybe the rules can wait? And so that's where I got a little bit too caught up. Now, I don't think you can get too caught up in church teachings. I mean, this is about your eternal soul we're talking about. That's a pretty huge priority. But I think maybe if I had balanced it a little bit more with like maybe starting out, like maybe an ENFP would do more of, oh, well, I'm really sorry that that's what you're going through, as long as you make sure that you follow the rules. Well, I think an ENFP might be a little bit less daft than that. But generally speaking, I think that insistence on going along with what my boss tells me, what the Bible tells me, can get me into situations where I don't know how to adapt. At my workplace, my boss has a very step-by-step orderly structure for how to do things. I always check my clipboard, and I always follow the same routine every single time I go into the gym. Now, granted, I don't follow it step by step exactly the same because the gym that I work at is open 24 hours, so I always have to be on the lookout for a customer getting in the way and then having to work around the customers. But generally speaking, I know what I have to get done and what I might have to prioritize. However, if my boss happens to leave out any detail, my extroverted thinking is not going to know how to adapt because my extroverted intuition is so pathetic I couldn't have foreseen the solution. Either that or I'm an ENFP that's just not good at thinking about possibilities. Because the other day, I spilled some disinfectant on the carpet. Now, in hindsight, that's probably like a pretty trivial thing to do. Like, it's just disinfectant. Like, it's not like I spilled something worse, like oil or blood on the carpet. It's not going to kill anyone. I mean, I put disinfectant on the benches all the time, and yet people still sit on them. However, at the time, all I could think of was hurrying up and picking up the bottle, wiping up as much of the disinfectant as possible, and putting a floor sign down, or a wet floor sign down. Why? Because that's what I do when I mop the floors. I didn't think that there was a creative solution I could have applied. So what I did was, rather than trust my judgment, I called my boss and I said, what should I have done? Thankfully, she said that is what she would have wanted me to do. But because she never specifically said during training, like, hey, Paul, this is what I want you to do when you spill disinfectant, I didn't know how to react to it. Thankfully, my gut actually managed to pull through. I think that's more evidence that I'm ISTJ, or maybe I have underlying causes that make me stupider. I don't know. You guys can let me know down in the comments or in a text message. So last, but most certainly not least, especially at least for me, is introverted feeling. Introverted feeling, I think, is pretty misunderstood when it's in the lower slots, because introverted feeling by nature is all about your own values and your own loyalties and beliefs. Not saying that extroverted feelers can't have values, but they typically tend to prioritize group harmony and keeping the people around them pleased, as opposed to really introspecting on what it is that they really want and desire. So you could say that most introverted feelers are more in touch with their emotions and what it is that they want. So in some ways, that allows for introverted feelers to have less likely of a chance to develop an existential crisis because they already know what it is that they want. They already know, this is how I feel. This is my purpose. This is what I believe. They're not going to constantly be having this, well, they don't use it introverted thinking, so they're not going to be questioning their own reality because they'll just pinch themselves and say, yep, I'm real. That's the end of it. But on the flip side, the stereotype of introverted feeling is that it makes these types come across as rather selfish in comparison to the extroverted feelers. Introverted feelers, I've often heard it described as they put self before the tribe. Extroverted feelers are the other way around. So neither type is exclusively focusing on either of them. But the ENFP and the ISTJ are almost always going to put their own desires and beliefs above that of everyone else. And then they will ask, how can I help you? In the case of the ENFP, I think their introverted feeling makes them be very authentic. They don't really lie too much. They might lie a little bit if they want to keep the peace, but I think generally speaking, their body language and their posture will give it away if they're lying too much. Like ENFPs kind of just vomit how they feel out at you, and so you kind of don't really have to guess that much. Maybe with their deepest, darkest secrets you might, because it's introverted feeling. Of course, it's going to be downplayed a little bit. But in the case of the ISTJ, introverted feeling is in the tertiary, so that can lead to them having a reluctance to share their emotions, or it can lead for them to downplay what they're feeling or think maybe it's not that big of a deal, that maybe it can be put on a shelf and stored away for later. They don't have this opposition to their feelings like the ESTJs and ENTJs do. But regardless, both types have this insistence on authenticity. In the case of the ENFP, it comes across in the form of emotional vomiting. In the case of the ISTJ, it comes across as being very factual, matter-of-factly, and honest, not really wanting to tell lies and having an aversion to people telling lies. Now, maybe there are ISTJ liars out there. I don't know. I personally think that's bogus. I personally think with introverted sensing, loving facts and information and details, I don't think too many ISTJs would want to venture outside of that. And I think their intuition being that low means they don't have the ability to quickly jump to a fabrication. This need to be yourself means that it's easier to automatically trust an ISTJ or an ENFP because they're being so authentic that you know that whatever it is that they're expressing is the real deal. They're not putting on a show. They're not trying to sugarcoat their emotions or their feelings. But on the flip side, they also need to learn, especially the ISTJs who have extroverted feeling as a blind spot function, they need to learn how to be more sensitive to what people are feeling instead of being so oblivious. Now, I've heard a couple of different explanations of how blind spot extroverted feeling works. One explanation I've heard is that it means that the ISTJ or INTJ is unaware of how they're presenting themselves to other people. So in other words, they might be looking like they're bored, but in reality they're not. That's just how they look. Or they might say something rude and not be intending to be rude or confrontational, but they just didn't notice that they were making the other person uncomfortable. It didn't cross their mind. So they can get too wrapped up in their introverted feeling and what they want and what it is that they value that they might follow the golden rule of do to others what you have them do to you a little bit too much. And I have to admit, I definitely fall into that category. I definitely have my moments where I just do not understand how the other person is feeling, and I always express it in totally the wrong way. Like, one of the biggest examples that I can think of is when my friend Jen was about to get married, and so she sent me an invitation to her wedding, and at first I thought, oh, well, I'll just politely decline because I don't like weddings. And that's what I did. I just said, no thanks, enjoy your wedding. And of course, when we met up again, she was kind of mad at me for that and kept wondering why it was that I didn't want to go to her wedding. And I said, well, I can just watch a video of it, just film the whole wedding and then I'll watch it later so that I don't miss it. And she said, no, Paul, I want you to be there. I want you to grace us with your presence. And I was like, what's that supposed to mean? It's not like I'm doing anything. It's not like I'm going to be contributing to the wedding at all. And she's like, well, you could be in the bridal party. I'm like, nope. I just could not see how just standing in the pews and watching her and a guy lock lips and be like, buddy, buddy. I just didn't see how my presence was going to change any of that. I could not see that her emotions were screaming, Paul, you mean something to me, and you being there is going to make my emotions happy. I was just thinking about it in the practical sense, and I was also thinking about my own emotions, about how much I hate weddings and how I just didn't really want to be in that kind of environment. If maybe both of us had not been so caught up in being introverted feelers, because she's also an introverted feeler, we could have perhaps been more willing to compromise. She could have said, well, Paul, if that's how you feel, I'll respect your decision and I will just hang out with you another time. And if I was more of an extroverted feeler, I might have tried to validate her feelings more. I might have said, I understand that this is how you feel, but I think I would be more of a detriment. So I definitely could have worked on my phrasing a little bit there. So I think ISTJs and ENFPs can definitely both fall into the habit of being so forward about how they feel that they don't always think about how it impacts the greater tribe. And I think these types definitely have a higher rate of needing to apologize. But at the same time, you can also always tell when the apology is genuine. When an ISTJ or an ENFP says, I am sorry, I did not mean to hurt you, I really hope you will forgive me, it is coming from a place of very deep emotion, but it is also coming from a place of very deep authenticity. So hopefully, if you have been hurt by an ISTJ or ENFP and that person comes to you in a contrite way, which I can't really think of how an ENFP or an ISTJ wouldn't, then I think it would probably be easier for you to forgive that person than if, say, an extroverted feeler would, where having introverted thinking, they'd probably have to come to their own conclusion. I don't want to try to delve into that. Now, really quickly before I go, I know this video is going on long enough, but I really want to address the final possibility, and that's I was told that ENFPs have what's called trickster introverted thinking in the 7th position. And I didn't really understand the explanation that much, so I'm not going to pretend that this is all scientific and that I've researched this, but from what the source told me, it's all about having this belief that anything could be possible and truths can coexist. I personally don't relate to that at all. While I do think that certain religions can compromise, like you take the Catholics and the Protestants, for example, they still believe in Jesus as the Messiah. They still believe he died on the cross for our sins. They believe in heaven. So there's a lot of coexisting beliefs that can coexist. But there's also certain truths that by nature contradict each other. You can't say a circle is both a circle and a square. You can't say that, take this hue of my shirt, it's blue. You might not be able to see it, but I assure you it's blue. You can't say that's both blue and black. That's not possible. That is inherently contradictory. You can't say someone is both a boy and a girl. And if I were to hypothetically have that blind spot function, I would allow myself to entertain those possibilities. So if that is true, that is what an ENFP goes through, then an ENFP would have to think to themselves, maybe I should think about what is actually real versus what I'm imagining, and not get so caught up in their imagination that they ignore reality. So with that, thank you very much for watching this stupidly long analysis. Let me know down in the comments what type you think I am, and if you think I did a good enough job of explaining our function stacks duality. Special thanks to my patrons Matthew Rakowski, Splatcat, and Spoon Ghost. Hopefully more of you will tag along, but if not, I get it. Finances are hard. I'm going through a bit of a struggle. So just watching this video makes me really happy because I want to be the world's longest running YouTuber. And how can I be a YouTuber if I don't have anyone watching my stuff? So I hope you all have a great rest of your day. And remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye.